recommendations that he hasn't yet indicated a willingness to accept.
Crick Whitaker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Everybody agrees that people deserve to live in rented homes that are safe, warm, free from damp and mould, and places they can feel secure in. Nobody doubts this intention at all, nor does anybody doubt the fact that rogue landlords should be clamped down on and be made responsible. They are the minority, though. The Secretary of State has already said that today on the floor of the House. But despite that fact, the government seem to be tarring every landlord with the same brush with this bill. The ironic fact is, however, that there are already a plethora, a huge amount of legislation that allows local authorities to clamp down on every housing issue, including the scourge of the rogue landlord. The issue is that the councils themselves are often the rogues, citing resources as their excuse for inaction, and with private landlords they already take action, or at least have the powers to take action if they so wish. This bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, without pinching the TV headline, is not what it says on the tin. It should be renamed the Rogue Landlord and Nightmare Tenants Bill, because all it does is force good landlords to take action that they wouldn't normally take. And just to highlight what I mean, this is what's happened in the past. The government forced landlords to put deposits into a government-approved scheme. They did, and if you've ever tried as a landlord to get money back from the scheme when tenants cause damage, it's nigh on impossible. So instead of now putting money in deposit schemes, many landlords don't take deposits. Instead, they've increased the rents to cover the cost. The government do not treat private landlords as sole traders, but instead treat the whole income from rents as taxable, whether you have a mortgage on the property or not. The result of this is increased rents. The government stopped paying landlords direct when tenants on benefits are in arrears, instead saying the contract is with the tenant and not the government. As a result of this, good landlords are now forced to take rent in advance. In the old days, they used to take it in arrears as the tenants were paid UC with those in benefits. And what they've done is they've increased the rents because of the higher risk. And many of them do not take people on benefits because of this. Now, the government say they'll legislate to make it illegal for landlords to discriminate against those on benefits. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, when landlords have between 50 and 20 applicants for each house, all the legislation in the world won't make a ha'porth of difference because the landlord will always take the most risk-free option. Now, on the key components of the bill is the removal of the Section 21 no-fault evictions. And because of the time reduction, I've had to strip loads out of this, Madam Deputy Speaker. But Leaders and Romans Group is one of the UK's largest property maintenance companies. In fact, they have over 65,000 landlord client base. They took a sample survey from theirs, and they found that Section 21 is rarely used and rarely overused, and even more rarely misused. And what they found of all those that responded to the survey, 80% had never used Section 21. And of those that had, a significant majority, over 60%, did so because the tenant was in breach of the lease. The English Housing Survey from 21-22 found that only 6% of tenancies ended at the landlord's volition. Both figures demonstrate the fact that the vast majority of landlords don't evict tenants on a whim. Now, so to end no-fault evictions through abolition of Section 21 is extreme, it's unnecessary, and it's damaging to both landlords and tenants as well. Now, briefly on Section 8 evictions to replace Section 21, I'll just pick up a couple. Ground 8 is currently the most heavily relied on ground for landlords trying to gain repossession. It currently provides a 2-week notice period. It applies where the tenant is 2 months in arrears of rent at the date of the Section 8 notice and the date of the possession hearing. In the bill, the notice period has been extended to 4 weeks. Also, any outstanding universal credit payments the tenant is due to receive are not to be included when calculating the arrears, if the universal credit payment would reduce the arrears below the 2-month threshold. The government can't say on one hand to landlords that the contract for UC is between the landlord and the tenant, then in this bill say the landlord has to take off the pending UC payments for rent. It's a nonsense. As I'm short of time, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll just briefly mention the expanding the powers for antisocial behaviour under Section 8. It's unlikely to change the effect of Ground 14, which is what it is. Because Ground 14, and I think the question was asked earlier on the floor, is actually discretionary. It's not mandatory, it's discretionary. Which means that the judge has to consider whether it is reasonable to make a possession order, even if the tenant is guilty of the conduct alleged. It is very unlikely that any court would consider a trivial conduct to justify a possession order. Now, the real issue here, and it's been mentioned several times, and it's not just this government, it's successive governments. The inaction at building more houses for people to live in. The market will not change until a government grasps the nettle and literally puts spades in the ground like Macmillan did in the 1950s. There's a reason why we have Homes for Ukraine. It's because we don't have any houses to put people in. There's a reason why we've got over 100,000 young men staying in hotels in this country. It's because we've got no homes to put them in. This bill will do absolutely nothing to improve the rental market. It will drive more landlords from the system, and it'd be interesting to say that the Secretary of State said earlier that actually it stayed static. In fact, the summary says landlords in this country have stayed static since 2016. I'd like to know exactly where the Secretary of State gets that information from, because that is not the information coming from the market.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Of course.
I thank my honourable friend. Is he aware that just 5 days ago, Jones Lang LaSalle, which is one of the biggest property consultants in the world, published a report which analysed the Rightmove evidence of rental market availability, and it shows that in the southeast and the southwest of England, the rental availability is down by 32% on 2019, and is that caused by some of the things that he's been talking about in his speech?
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for his question, and he's absolutely right. It's the problem right throughout the country, not just in the southeast. It's happening up in the north, in the Calder Valley, wherever you are. There is an absolute shortage of homes, whether it's socially rented or private rented sector as well. And as I've said, this bill will do absolutely nothing to improve the rental market. It will drive more landlords from the system, and because of those shortages of homes to rent, where dozens of people apply for homes that are available to rent, it will do nothing to curb the rogue landlord element either. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.